Hello, everybody. It is Michael Pierce here. I'm back after another, I don't know what you'd call it, a hiatus or something. I've been taking those more often. Grad school's gone very well these days, in case anyone was wondering. I am doing very well, but I finished an essay today a lot earlier than I thought I would. I'm in a good mood, and I realized, you know what, I have some typology ideas I would like to share with you. So, let's go. I'll see what you guys think of this. This is just this marker smells really weird. I don't know what's up with it. This is about the perceiving functions, intuition, sensation, in both their extroverted and introverted forms. You'll notice I've got some stuff written up there as well. I'm going to rewrite it over on the side, but you can read what I have up there already. It'll serve as my notes. So anyway, this is a way of trying to characterize the SENI axis and the NESI axis and trying to better understand the nuances there. So we'll see how this goes. Excuse me. So my way of understanding this right now is I know when I originally, and this is in motes and beams as well, but it's sort of from the beginning, one way at least of characterizing sensation and intuition is sensation is about something which is given, and that's why I related it to this notion of denotation. It is that which is denoted, that which is simply there. Whereas intuition is about the potential connections with that object, all of the things that are implied about the object, hence its relationship to connotation. I want to try to give this a little more nuance here in terms of understanding extroverted intuition, extroverted sensation, introverted sensation. So we'll just go ahead and do a diagram, which I've already done up here, but I'm going to make it a bit bigger so it's easier to see on your screen. So we could say that, yeah, you can see that. This right here is a square, and it has hard lines around it. And we're going to say that this is the sort of typical mental object of SE, of extroverted sensation. It is a given object. It is sort of singular. It has a certain number of properties, and I'll draw actually a little point in the center because there's this kind of centered element to sensation in general, which has to do with the fact that it is something, I keep using the term given because that's the only one that I've got in my head, but and with extroverted sensation, this thing is external to the person. There's this sense in which it is other than you, and things are, this kind of goes for TEFI as well, and to a certain extent. That is real, which can punch me. Is a weird way of putting it, but it's kind of true. It's like I know that it is real if it can fight back, if it resists me. Right? Because if it doesn't resist me, then that would seem to imply, and resistance, I'm taking this in a very general sense, it would imply that it is just a part of me, meaning it is not other than me, meaning it is not real. That is real, which is not of me, is sort of the prejudice, if you will, of extroverted sensation, which you'll find in introverted intuition as well in this different form. But anyway, so that is the object. Great. So then you have this notion of intuition. And intuition we could represent as these lines. So I'll erase the SE for a moment here. I'm going to redraw some of this in a moment. But hopefully you can see that. There's these, maybe I'll make them like bigger dots or something. I'll get rid of that dot in the middle there. So you have these dotted lines, and the dotted lines intersect over and sort of provide a matrix or a frame for the given object. And they can do all kinds of things. They could represent the trajectory of the object, right? Like the way that it moves through space, or what it could become, its destiny, its inner meaning that is beyond, the just simply given object itself. There's all kinds of different ways to characterize it, but what's important is that it's a dotted line. It's a dotted line for Ni. So this object is Se, and then the dotted lines are Ni. This is because for the whole axis of SENI, at least if I'm understanding it correctly, the prejudice is that which is sort of real externally is sensation, and then you have the connoted meanings of the thing, its destiny, where it's going to go, its trajectory, but that doesn't have this external reality. It is something you perceive with the mind purely, and that kind of exists in here in a way. It doesn't have this external otherly existence to it. It is something which you're not going to be able to reach out and grab it, but you can still apprehend it as that which is guiding events, right? I always have, when I think of Ni, I always have this image of like these giant eels like moving just underneath the surface of kind of dark water, and as they move they create like these odd currents and things, and if you know, watching them is like Ni, or watching these like, but they're like ghost eels, you see. This is what's important, is that they're not real eels that you can like do scientific experiments on or harpoon or something. They are eels of the mind, but they're real in the sense that they manifest themselves through the external SE objects. Hope that makes sense. I'll elaborate that a bit more in a minute. So that is the SENI axis. This will become more clear what's going on here as I do the NESI axis, right over here. The NESI axis is the reverse, obviously, because SI is the given object, but the given object is now dotted line, right? Hope you can see that. It's pretty tiny, but SI, the given object is a dotted line, which is sort of to signify the fact that which is given in the sense that it is in SE, that which is given is now that is sort of an element of the mind. It has this more personal relationship, whereas the meaning or the potential of objects is a hard line, because that is what is other than the subject, is outside of the subject and actually exists in the world in this way. So this is NE. So let me give an example to kind of explain where I'm getting this from. So one of the things that struck me when I was doing my more recent videos that involved some of the ideas, the exchange between me and Jack Aaron, one of the things that struck me is that, at least as I understand it, his way of approaching the system is to posit the relations first. He has a certain number of relations or dichotomies, as it were, these hard lines, this matrix wherein the objects exist, and the objects get their meaning and their identity from the fact of these relations, of these dichotomies, these concepts, wherein they sort of slot in like variables in an equation or something. And so you start with the relations. The relations are the starting point and are in that sense more real than the given objects, which in this case would be the given functions. My way of starting was to start with the functions and then to deduce the relations wherein they exist, as it were. So I started by positing this kind of center point here and then deducing the NI relations based on just observing how the functions interact with each other and what would have to be deduced from that. But Jack's way of starting was to start with the NE, to have this NE approach to it, where you have these relations between the objects and the objects themselves when I say object, I mean it very generally. In this case, it is the functions. Those slot in. I hope that makes sense. Let me try another approach. Well, so one way of looking at it, and I kind of was writing this up here, is that, yeah, that's right. So the ENTP and presumably the ENFP as well, insofar as they're dominant NE types, but NE as such posits relations, posits the potential, the matrix, as it were. It posits that before the objects which exist in the matrix. The objects, therefore, have this ephemerality. They come and go, but the matrix remains. The rules of the system, I like the term matrix because it's like like a grid that sort of pervades all of reality, and that all of the objects sort of exist within, like particular answers in the variables of an equation. That's like a perfect way of understanding it. So ENTP posits the relations before the objects, and it deduces the nature of the objects from those relations in some sense. And so I represented it up here. I'll rewrite it. So NE is R will be relations, and it deduces from the relations, it deduces the objects. And NE is focused on these relations, focused on the relations in this sense, where it's like the hard lines, they actually exist. The other source of me sort of really thinking about this was some of my conversations with John Barnes, actually. So let me do a digression here, because it'll hopefully help it make more sense. And as I understand John's ideas, and he can correct me in the comments if necessary, is that and this started from us discussing Jung. One of the problems that he has with Jung is that, and I think he said this in a couple of his videos, in fact, which are well worth your time to watch. Jung, his problem with Jung is basically that Jung is an NI type, is what it comes down to, because Jung posits the archetypes, posits the meaning of things as something that is in the mind. And this doesn't bother Jung, right? He posits, well, there's this material stuff, and that's the external stuff, but then the meaning of it exists in the mind as these archetypes. And the prejudice here, right, is that it doesn't have this external objective reality to it. This doesn't bother Jung. Well, I'll get into why I don't think that bothers Jung in a moment, at least not the early Jung. John is like, no, I don't want this to simply be a psychological point, because he sees like things like NE or FE, these concepts, as they've got to also be real. They exist somehow externally as these concepts outside of the mind. It's difficult for me to explain it because it really gets right to this prejudicial difference between NE and NI, I think. That's why it fascinated me, and I started drawing this stuff up. Because for me, when I think of something being external to myself, when I think of something being extroverted, as it were, I automatically assume it's also a sensation type of thing. And that means it is this given thing that it doesn't have to be material in any rigorous philosophical sense, but it's material in the sense of it. I will naturally imagine it as this actual thing that I can reach out and grab and do stuff with and manipulate, and that can punch me or do things to me, have this causal relation. When I think of something being out there external, it's a sensation thing, it's hard lines. So when John or anybody else starts talking about these concepts or these relations, but is positing that they actually exist out there in the world. And that is a prejudiced way of saying it, by the way, that I keep on saying it actually exists, because I am referring back to this idea that, well, that which actually exists, subjectively exists, is a sensation type things, not the intuition type things. But for John, when he says, no, the NE, the SI, the relations, the matrix in which things exist, that is real. In my mind, I'm like, what do you mean by that? I immediately imagine things like this actual grid, like this metaphysical, like spiritual, like ghost grid that actually exists and actually like pushes things and moves them around, you know. And it's like, wow, that's a really like rigorous metaphysics that you're proposing there. And perhaps that is what they mean, but they don't go there, at least not naturally. It doesn't have this gritty material sense to it, because in some sense they're saying that the extroverted is not necessarily sensation. That's not naturally how they see it. They see the equations, the relations, as being more real than the particular objects that exist within those relations, which is very foreign and is, I think, one of the big differences and big conflicts that can arise between NI and NE, is that NI, from NE's perspective, NI-SE is much more likely to be very materialistic or even reductionistic, and to have this idea of wanting, oh, how would you say it? I had it a moment ago. Well, like, for example, saying things like, well, the equations are just, they're not really real. If it's a relationship, it's not really real. It's very malleable. It can change depending on how the particular objects change. It's the particular objects which are real and which kind of have this priority in determining what the rules of the universe are. And so with SE, I think that's part of why you have this real emphasis of freedom, particularly with the beta quadra, with the NFJs and the STPs, where you will have this notion with it. There's other reasons for this, but you will definitely have this notion with particularly INFJ and ESTP of, you will sense yourself as being a kind of SE object, a body or a soul or something that really exists singularly in the world and can direct its own fate. You are what determine the relations that occur in the universe. It's very existential in that way, because it's like you're positing this single point, like a bowling ball or something, and the relations are like the pins, right? It's like they're not as real. The bowling ball, if they were real, then they would push the bowling ball and they would demonstrate their reality in that way. And that's what SE is looking for. Whereas for NE, it's like, no, there are rules that govern and that are more real than the particular object. I feel like I just keep repeating myself, but hopefully that makes sense. It's an idea I'll want to develop more in the future, but so anyway, so that's one of the differences. It's not even really a difference, it's just a very different way of looking at it that I kind of realized as I was talking with John and hashing some of this stuff out and watching his videos. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say on that. Well, we'll see if anything else comes up. So anyway, so that's NE, or a way of characterizing NE. So then, let's look at the flip side. We have, say, SI, which says the same thing, that the relations determine the object, that these sort of intuitive relations are real in the sense of they're the more actual objective things. But the interesting thing about SI is that its focus is nevertheless still on the object. The object in the sense of the sensory thing. Its focus is on the intersection of these rules and relations. And that's extremely interesting, particularly for someone who is so, if you put it in a function stack, I'm very low on SI as an INFJ. And so it's very interesting to me because what you get, I think, is this, from my perspective, this very kind of tragic relationship where they are focused on precisely what their own psychology dictates to be ephemeral. They are something that is generated by the rules of the system. The rules of the system are what exist before anything else, but they are attached to these particularities that are produced by the system. And in some sense, SI is even more particular than SE, because at least for SE, SE can say like, well, I went on this skiing trip and I had a really great time. And so they'll, in some sense in their mind, they're like, well, you know, I'll just go on the skiing trip again and I'll have a new experience. And they don't have this memory in the same way that SI does, because SI will say, I went on a skiing trip, and the particularity of that particular skiing trip, right, or whatever it is now gone. It doesn't have material reality anymore. But it still exists as this memory, and there can be a tendency to try to recreate conditions to recreate that thing happening. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think particularly in, say, INFPs, where you combine this with the FI sentiment, it helps to explain something that is actually rather foreign for me as an INFJ, this idea that I see so often with the INFP of, from my perspective, it seems like a kind of fetishization of objects, because this fetishization of particular things that you own and that you have this history with, and that you have these memories with, and you're like, this like particular objects will take on this kind of very personal, it's not even symbolic because it doesn't generalize, it's like just real for them because only they experienced it. I don't know, there's this, that's my best way of putting it, is that there's kind of this tragic sense to SI because it is in love with something that it accepts as being not even really fully real. It is in love with that which they themselves recognize to not be real in this sense. They probably wouldn't describe it in that way, but at least with INFPs, I get this, there's kind of this tragic sense of being in love with the ephemeral and recognizing that everything's going to pass away, and that you don't get in the same way, I think, with INFJs. INFJs have their own kind of poetic angst going on. So anyway, so that's my characterization of SI. I think that, again, I think where you get this notion of memory being important with SI, not literal memory, but this kind of figurative memory, in that you have these dotted lines, you have the world, and the world keeps chugging along. That is, the rules and relations of the world keep chugging along, but the particular value that instantiated itself in the world is gone now. It has faded, and it only exists within your mind, as sort of an archetype that you try to recreate. So anyway, so that's SI. Or at least an aspect of SI. It's not the whole of SI, but it's maybe shed some insight onto it. Then you have, do we have enough room? Yeah, we got room. We'll go to, which one do we want to go to? We'll go to SE. SE, right, because it's SENI, it reverses the relation. So it is now the particular object which determines the relations within which it partakes or participates. So again, you have this notion of like the bowling ball, which it's like heavy and big and dense, and it exists. Bang, you drop it on the floor and you can break your toe, And the relationships that bowling ball partakes in or participates in are less real than the bowling ball itself. And the bowling ball itself is seen as being the center point of those. It is not produced by an intersection of relations. It determines what those relations are. Or those relations are hypothetical. The relations are hypothetically posited by an I, right? They're in the mind, they're subjective, but they are posited onto this real object as sort of a tentative hypothetical hypothesis of what the bowling ball's trajectory is going to go. But it ultimately is kind of up to the bowling ball. Depending on how radical you want to go with it. So that's the idea there. So SE is focused on the object, like with SI. So the difference between SE and SI is not where their focus is. They're both focused on kind of the center point, right, of that which is given. But SI believes that that center point is I keep using the term less real. Hopefully I hope you're following kind of the odd way I'm using terms here. But SI believes that it's less real, but SE is like, no, that is the most real thing. That's why I'm interested in it. It is that which is real and external to me. Meanwhile, NI, finally, NI, same idea, objects determine relation, but it is interested in the relations. It is interested in what it itself also takes to be ephemeral. So I suppose there's kind of a tragic element there too, if we want to continue what SI was saying. But it is most interested in the relationships in which SE partakes, but it doesn't posit those relationships, those meanings, those connotations as being objectively real. They are in the mind, they are posited hypothetically onto the thing. And so there's this, on the one hand, there's this real sense of you having control over them. You have this hypothetical control over over kind of existence itself, of like the meaning of existence. I mean, I think existentialism in a lot of cases is a very SENI thing, certainly with Sartre, where it's like you posit the meaning onto the things, which is not to say, oddly enough, that it's not like I think and therefore the thing happens, though I think if and when an SI-NI type, or an SE-NI type, I think some SE-NI types can go, when they go a little crazy, they can start thinking that. They can start really thinking that, oh, I can like mind control people or something like it. You know, when something's not wired right and they're suffering from a severe mental illness, I think that's maybe more common for SE-NI to kind of have those kinds of delusions of grandeur. But that's just it's a hypothesis I've thrown out there. But the more important thing being that, like I said, it's like these ghost eels that go through the water. What is real and what's going to actually affect you is the water. But for NI, they posit this notion of, well, there's these deeper things, these currents, or these emergent properties or relations or something which are causing the water to move in the way that it does. And that's what I'm interested in. Or at the very least, they will still say that the eels are real. They're like, oh, they're on a transcendent plane or something. But the reason that they're more interesting is they're not interesting in themselves so much as they're interesting in what the effects are in causing things to move around and the motions that they produce. So you have, Schopenhauer or Nietzsche or Hegel, Schopenhauer, the will to live. He reduces everything down to the will, this will that, goes, woo, like wind. Nietzsche, it's will to power. Hegel, it's this notion of dialectic. It's this motion that is underlying the real things. You see this in Sartre as well, when in Nausea, I mention him in the book as an example, where he has this moment where he no longer sees, he's seeing just pure NI in itself, and so everything becomes kind of featureless and just these like pure masses continually moving into each other and growing and decaying and writhing into itself and out of itself. That's like pure NI in a way that he's seeing. It's real in this derivative sense, if that makes sense. So yeah, there we go. I think that's everything I wanted to say. Hopefully that made sense. I'll develop this idea more, but I just figured, hey, I haven't made a video in a while, and so I'll just share an idea. So there you go. I've shared my idea, and I hope you all have a great day. Happy Thanksgiving for some of you, depending on if you celebrate that. All right, take care, y'all.